And it comes from a scripture that I learned as a child that I'm really, really surprised I'm speaking to. I can't tell you how surprised I am. And the scripture, the bit of scripture it is we are that we may have joy. And I can't tell you that I would have ever thought that that scripture would have come to my mind. I grew up Mormon, and that verse is part of another verse that is out of the Book of Mormon. And it came to me in the middle of my meditation, and I was shocked. And in that moment, I also realized that I must embrace that which I came from, because it is part of my journey. It's part of the joy that I am. So that just gives you a little bit of that, because that showed up in a meditation, and I must tell you, it showed up in almost shouting, like I had to get up and move away from it. Except it's in me, so it was like kind of moving away. You know, you just keep moving, but it doesn't go anywhere because it's right there. And then I knew that, well, that must be what I'm to speak on today. About 3 or 4 days ago, there was this beautiful story in the New York Times. And the story was about a woman who's a pretty well-known psychologist at Cornell University, and her name is Sandy Bem. And a couple of days after her 69th birthday, she was watching HBO, and there was a documentary on television, it was in 2009, called The Alzheimer's Project. And it kind of drew her in because in her own mind, she was having what she called cognitive oddities. I really like that. I'm going to use that from now on. And those cognitive oddities it was the best way to describe what was happening for her. So this documentary drew her in, and this exploration of what is Alzheimer's. And at some point in the documentary, the host gave a test. And it was a memory test, a pretty simple memory test. And so she decided to take it. So she walked through the test as the host directed, and at the end of the test, the host described what was pass or fail, and she failed. And it really shook her up, as it is understandable. And in that experience, what she did was, after she got over the initial shock, her husband and her, they went to a hospital nearby and they did some testing. And when she took the tests, she passed a lot of them. And there was good news that, she had considerable memory. The challenging news was that she was at the beginnings of the development of Alzheimer's. And she kind of settled into that, and interestingly, she decided that she was not going to actually walk through the whole process of how Alzheimer's removes our identity of who we are in this material earthly world. She decided that she was going to actually have a physician assist her in physician-assisted suicide. Meanwhile, while she's still on the earth, she decided to document the experience of what she called the capricious maddenings of this experience, where she would have these moments of looking at complex problems and situations and being able to beautifully walk through them. And then in the next moment, her mind was as blank as a blackboard. But what was really interesting in her sort of documentation of that, and the stories in the New York Times just a few days ago, what was really interesting about that is her journey into self. Because what she found is, along the way, the labels that she had for herself and others had for her, that the stories that carried her up to this moment of who she is and who everyone else is began to be taken off, if not broken off. And what she was coming into being was someone very different than that hyper-analytical self that was who she was. And her daughter Emily, she had 2 children, a daughter and a son, were raised in this sort of political experience because she was a psychologist at Cornell and studied gender. They were raised with kind of a genderless upbringing. And so often, Emily, her daughter, was pushed into what being genderless meant, and it wasn't always necessarily fun. That was just her experience. But she said that as her mother started to walk through this process, what showed up with this very kind, very loving, very open, very gentle, very accepting, very loving mother. And that in that experience, what she was finding was that what was about to happen in Emily's life, having a child, which was Sandy's grandchild, that she was actually full of the capacity to be this grandmother that she didn't think her mother could be. And she would sing these beautiful songs to her new grandchild, Sandy would. His name was Felix. She would sing these songs, and she would miss words and replace words, and it really didn't seem to bother her at some point, and she'd just say, "Oh, you know what I mean." She started to let go of the idea of what she was supposed to be, and she allowed the experience to take her into what she's meant to be. And in those moments, what she was experiencing with her daughter and her grandson, Felix, was pure joy. Was this experience of pure joy. Griffin, can you put up that first one? She said, "My new brain might actually make me better suited to be a grandmother than my focused, hyper-analytical old brain. I found a way of being that seems content." And that is her with her grandchild back then, right before her passing. It's funny how experience and the situations and the things that show up in our life kind of erode that edgy hardness that sometimes we get as life moves through us. And that's exactly what happened to her. She was able to experience the joy of just being. And her daughter was able to experience her in a way that she hadn't, which was perfect for the experience they were having. And ultimately, what's really interesting is that's the short story, but you know there were days in their experience, the difficulties, the challenges, the getting up and the doing that kind of distract us from the very beautiful gift that life is and what it brings and what it can bring to us if we just allow it. That the very essence of who we are, regardless of tragedy or triumph, is joy. That we are not our story, that we are not our experiences, although they set us up beautifully. And they allow us to walk through life in such a way that as a practitioner and soon-to-be minister, when I sit and I hear the stories of people, what I hear is this beauty that is in the individual nature of each one of us. But what I do know, too, is that there's this part of us that I know, the part of me that is aware that I am part of something bigger, that I am part of some undifferentiating essence that we call God, Spirit, universal energy. I am part of that. And if I can get past the day-to-day drum of waking up, brushing my teeth, doing my hair, going to the job if that's what you're doing, having an experience with family that isn't always what I want. But if I can walk through it and see that each and every one of those experiences is something that is meant exclusively for me to understand who I really am. The experience is not as important as the experience of coming to know who I am, so it doesn't really matter what the experience is. It shows up, and I get to choose. That's the beautiful part about Science of Mind. We learned that the choices we make are what's important. That the choices we make and how we see things bring that power to bring that awareness of the divine that is us. I know that in my life there is something called joy, and that joy within me invites me to have that experience of it. And it has two sides to it. It has the sorrows that are life, that is life, and it has the joy, which is that ever-compassing feeling and experience of oneness. Griffin, can you bring up the next slide? Because it is in that moment when we're walking through the stuff that Steve Maraboli says, don't let the agony, regret, or fog of yesterday blind you to the fact that each new day carries with it a plethora of opportunities to move your life into the right direction. Each is an opportunity. Not this one or that one, not the ones we choose, but each one of them. And we get to choose to create that in our lives. We get to choose to bring that connection of the divine into each one of our experiences so we can see the truth of who we are and see the expansion of our awareness in each experience. There's a beautiful gift in that. Griffin? Rabindranath Tagore, he said that joy is the realization of the truth of oneness, the oneness of our soul with the world. Last night, my wife, Janine, and my daughter, Reese, we went to see the movie Pitch Perfect 2. Gosh, I love that film. You know why I love that film? It's amazing. It's a group of young college girls in a, just totally slipped my mind, a cappella group singing cover songs. And through most of the film they fight in a hilarious way until the end when they come together and they realize that at some point in their relationship, because this is number 2, that they lost their connection with each other. And then at the end of the film, they come together for this absolutely amazing performance. I mean, absolutely amazing performance. The reason it was so amazing is because there was a connection, a oneness in who they were, and a joy that came from that. Sitting there watching it made us, the three of us, just go to tears. Because there was a beauty in that joy of knowing that we're all one. And the way they sang was really secondary to how they did it. And the fact that they knew that they were of value. They knew that it was about the experience of them coming together. It's about connectedness. And that connectedness is where the joy is. Joy is the infallible sign of the presence of God. There's moments in our life where we just feel that absolute joy. Even in the moment of the most intense sorrow. I'm sure each one of you have felt that. You may have been there for somebody during a birth, and how beautiful that is. For an important experience, graduation, it's that time of year. For someone who's transitioned. And even in that moment of absolute sorrow, there's a joy in it of connecting with the person that you're there with and for. There's a joy in sharing that connectedness. Because at that moment, we're actually in the essence of who we are, one. That happens all the time. And if we can, throughout our day, just take a nice breath and remember this gift called life. This gift of me. I came here with my own unique purpose to express and expand in that. And when I experience joy, the beautiful part of that is I'm now aware of the presence that is God, that is the divine, and I'm sharing it. I'm sharing it because I'm not the only one that will feel it. That as I share in it, we all feel it. We all create it from that. And from that place of joy, we actually create a world that works for everyone. Because it's a place of not judging, not comparing, not contrasting. Mark Twain said that comparison kills joy. So that when I'm in that place of unadulterated joy, I'm in that place of knowing and being enough. Because I'm recognizing that I am walking as the divine. Even though Reverend Sandy's not here today, she channels Rumi through me. Griffin, can you move forward twice for me, please? Sorrow prepares you for the joy. It violently sweeps everything out of your house so that new joy can find space to enter. It shakes the yellow leaves from the bough of your heart so that fresh green leaves can grow in its place. It pulls up rotten roots so that new roots hidden beneath have room to grow. Whatever sorrow shakes from your heart, far better things will take their place. It's really important to recognize that those moments of sorrow that show up in our lives, the challenges that show up as an event or situation or circumstance, is an opportunity to clear it out. Just clear it out. Because as human beings, occasionally, it's important that we clear it out. It's important that we just let it go. And sometimes it takes an experience of sorrow to do that. Whether it's sorrow for ourselves or sorrow for the feeling of someone else going through it. Because there's joy in that service of supporting someone and being there. Ernest Holmes says life is just not something to be endured, it is to be lived in joy, in a fullness without limit. At the end of my grandmother's life, she had Alzheimer's. And the last 6 months of her life, she was in an assisted living facility. And then we moved her into another smaller unit to where we could have a little bit more intimate experience, and there's a lot behind that, but let me limit the story to this. The last month of her life, every day I would walk in and sometimes she would be so ecstatic I was there, and sometimes she wasn't there. She was somewhere, for sure. She wasn't there with me. But this one time, and I believe it was probably the last week of her life, I walked in, and she turned, and she was sitting in a chair, and she turned and looked at me, and I'm looking at her, everything is stripped away. She was fastidious with her appearance. She was often afraid. She cared what people thought. And a lot of that stuff of what we all carry, she had with her. But in that moment, when she looked at me, none of that was there. There was just this beautiful soul, the soul that I knew who she was. She looked up at me and she went, oh.